What's happening, guys? Welcome back to the Severe MMA preview show. Paul Browne here, and only Paul Browne this week. I'm flying solo. Ian had the pleasure of doing that last week because I had some technical difficulties. I couldn't get any audio running through my pretty much brand new laptop for the last 2 weeks. So I've missed the last 2 weeks of preview shows, but I'm back with a bang this week, and it's a great week to be back. The UFC card that we've got lined up for the weekend ahead, maybe not the strongest that we've ever looked at, but we have a huge PFL event taking place on Saturday night in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So I'm kind of going to focus maybe a little bit more on that card. I'm going to look through some of those hard hitting fights on the Battle of the Giants cards. We've got, of course, our own Paul Hughes is in action, isn't he? Outside of those two shows, we have a couple of Irish fighters in action at Brave in Tenerife. So I might take a quick glance at those. And the UFC card, we might just take a quick sniff through it, but I don't think we'll have to. There's anything there that's really worth diving into. I'm not going to keep you guys too long today. I'm just going to basically break down the main fights, the ones to look out for on the PFL card, and we'll do a little bit of analysis on the biggest ones and see where the fights might be won and lost. And I think we'll just get straight into it. Yeah. So we're looking at the Saudi Arabia event first, and it's the return of Francis Ngannou, and this is something that a lot of us maybe didn't think we were going to see. It's been 2.5 years now since that last MMA fight that he had against Cyril Gane when he unified the UFC heavyweight belt. Gane, of course, was the interim title holder at the time, and Ngannou had the unified belt. So he unified, he defended the belt. He then, he fell into that contract dispute with the UFC and he walked away. Now, he hasn't fought MMA since. He's been in the boxing ring on two occasions. Of course, he had Tyson Fury in and around a year ago. I think it's just coming up on the 1 year anniversary of that. And then he had Anthony Joshua, I think it was in March this year. So he's been in the boxing ring, but not in the MMA, octagon or cage or whatever you want to call it. So my concerns going into this fight, I did an article on MMA Sucker this week about this, and I'd like to highlight one thing from the start. I'll preface my whole opinion on the fight by saying that I think Francis Ngannou is by quite a distance a better fighter than Henan Ferreira. He really is, in pretty much any aspect of the game. Henan Ferreira is a very, very good fighter. He's very, very dangerous, as we're seeing. He's hit a hell of a hot streak of form. There's one or two weapons that have been really, really working for him over the last year in particular. And, he's bagged himself a PFL world title, $1 million, all that good stuff. And now he's in this massive fight. And, if the rumors or the media speculation that we got around the time Francis Ngannou signed his contract is to be believed, he's probably getting $2 million for this fight this weekend. So, this guy has done very well for himself. He's in there against Francis Ngannou, who, as I said, a far more accomplished fighter. I mean, that's fairly straightforward. He's done so much more in his career than his opponent. He has fought the best of the best in the UFC. He's beaten the likes of Stipe Miocic and Cyril Gane and guys like that. And won and defended that UFC heavyweight title. He's done some amazing things. Not to mention, what he went on to achieve in boxing too. But there's a few things that just make me question whether Francis Ngannou should win this fight, which he should be expected to win if you're just judging the qualities of both fighters. Number one, that last fight 2.5 years ago, straight after the fight, Ngannou revealed that he had torn his MCL and ruptured his ACL. Now, I might have those the wrong way around, but that was kind of, pretty much the story of the knee injury. He said he kind of had that going into the fight, and I think he had surgery a month or two after that fight with Gane. And then, by that point, he was in that whole contract dispute, and there wasn't really any movement on getting him another fight. There was they were talking about trying to get him matched up with John Jones, who was moving up. I don't think John Jones had actually fought at heavyweight by that time, had he? No, he hadn't. So that's where they were at that time. So bear in mind, Ngannou probably wasn't physically capable of training any MMA for quite a long period after that Cyril Gane fight 2.5 years ago. Now, later in the year, he went on then to sign for a boxing match with Tyson Fury. You'd have to imagine that there was zero MMA done in the interim, and he just went straight into boxing training. He gets through that fight, and he did so well. looking back at it now in hindsight, it's very clear that Tyson Fury just did not take the threat of Francis Ngannou seriously at all. And that played a big factor into it. You would imagine, having watched now back the Anthony Joshua fight, you would think, okay, well, maybe if Tyson Fury had even turned up mildly prepared for Francis Ngannou, then it might have been a whole different outcome. But of course, Ngannou gave a great account of himself and even put Tyson Fury on the mat, didn't he? He comes out of that fight, and then the speculation is, wow, the talk is he's earned so much money now. He's probably never going to come back to MMA because, all these fights are out there for him now. Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, all those guys, huge money fights to rematch with Fury. And of course, then a few months down the line, he signs and he does the fight with Anthony Joshua, and we all saw how that went. It was pretty horrific. Was he knocked down 3 times in the opening 5.5 minutes, something like that. And the third and final one of those was the conclusive one. It was a really bad knockout. So, that's kind of a 2 year window of him not training any MMA. He's in there training, he's training for boxing fights, but he's not taking leg kicks, he's not throwing leg kicks. He's not training at fighting in that slightly longer range. Different things like wrestling, defending takedowns, never mind even shooting them or grappling, jiu-jitsu stuff on the floor. But there's a hell of a lot of demands on your body, particularly on your knee joints when you're talking about things like this. Even when it goes so far as, checking kicks and things like that, it can be absolutely brutal. If you're recovering from a surgery and you're dealing with inflammation issues and, tendon and ligament problems, boxing is a lot easier on the knees than MMA is for sure. So the fact that he's gone so long without training in MMA, and of course this fight was only announced in the second half of this year, wasn't it? So he'll have come back to MMA training, but he's only realistically had maybe 3 months of training specifically for this sport that he's about to compete in against one of the most dangerous fighters in the world. So that really concerns me. He is going into this fight. There has been no reported issues. You would have to hazard a guess that, he's probably feeling okay in that regard, although we never find out these things before a fight. We always find out after. I was just listening to Sean O'Malley today speaking with Ariel Helwani this week about, his hip injury. And of course, that's the type of thing a fighter speaks about a couple of days after taking a loss, isn't it? Well, I had this going into the fight. And, Ngannou did the same with the MCL and the ACL. Now, he won that fight, but he still came out afterwards and revealed he was going in there injured. So, it could well be the case that that knee has maybe not withstood the trials and the tests that a training camp for a heavyweight world title fight will throw at you. So it's that's a question mark that maybe reduces my assuredness that Francis Ngannou is the better fighter and should win this fight. So that maybe, hampers it a little bit. One that's even more valid than that, I believe, will be his chin. So that knockout that he suffered against Anthony Joshua, and not just a knockout, the nature of how the whole fight and the way he took 3 knockdowns in just under 2.5 minutes by one of the biggest, strongest, hardest hitters in combat sports. That's not the type of thing that a fighter can recover from quickly. And here we are, I think it's 6 months later, and he's stepping in there against a man mountain in Renan Ferreira, who's 6'8". He's quite a bit taller than Francis, a couple of inches of reach advantage. And this guy, this problema, Renan Ferreira, he hits so hard. He's on a great winning streak of knockout victories. That right hand, that pull counter, he's taken out some really good opponents, like some decent level opponents. I think Maurice Green and then Ryan Bader, of course, smaller than him, but everybody's smaller than him. He just times it. He looks very good fighting at those ranges, those distances. He's good at keeping the fight at long distance because he'll do things like dip and jab to the body. He'll just use those long range weapons to great effect. Where he can be vulnerable is in close quarters. We saw what Denis Goltsov did to him in that $1 million fight. Now, he ultimately beat Goltsov. He knocked him out, I think, at the start of the second round. But in the opening round, Goltsov managed to get him down and really dominate him on the ground. So we've seen Francis use those type of tactics, haven't we? We saw him get in there in the octagon, and we've seen him implement his wrestling before. Even Stipe was on the end of it the second time they met. So it wouldn't be surprised to see Francis go that route, to see maybe if he can just close the distance and get inside and take those long range weapons away from Ferreira. But that can be easier said than done. You got to get past a couple of very, very dangerous weapons to do that. And we saw when Ryan Bader tried to rush him, he can just, he can take that quarter step back and just throw that right hand with beautiful precision. So those are the couple of reasons that I'm a little bit. I'm backing Francis to get the job done, but I'm doing it with some trepidation. I'm not 100% confident in his physical state going into this fight. And that's, those are valid questions to ask. I mean, we don't often see fighters come back a couple of months after a vicious knockout and be able to take a shot. Look what happened to Alexander Volkanovski earlier this year when people were concerned about him coming back so quickly from a knockout loss too. And, it kind of went the way that we feared it would. So, this fight brings about a lot of questions, but that is the beauty sometimes of mixed martial arts. If you know the answers to all of the questions going into these fights, you generally aren't that bothered about watching the fights then in the end anyway. There's no real draw there, but this one, I think we'll all be on the edge of our seats for it. Moving on then to the co-main event. This is just in women's mixed martial arts terms, this is the biggest probably megastar fight that the PFL and Bellator could put on at the moment. You got the Bellator champ Chris Cyborg stepping in there against the PFL champ Larissa Pacheco. Brazil on Brazil action. I'm here for it. Let's do it, ladies. So it's again this is not a question for me when I'm trying to analyze who I think is going to win the fight. If I'm just looking at the qualities, the accomplishments, the skill set of both fighters, I look at Chris Cyborg and I see a fighter that's a decent amount or a couple of levels higher than her opponent in all areas of the game, all facets of the game. She's just got that little bit more in her arsenal. The question for me, just like with Francis Ngannou coming into this fight, is what version of Cyborg do we see here? She's been doing this for so long now. I mean, I've been around the game for years, and I remember when I first got involved in mixed martial arts and training and competing and stuff. Cyborg was, she was a fighter to fear back then. So, this is quite a long time ago. She's been around the block so much. She's been doing the damn thing, and nobody's been really able to hold a candle to her over the last few years, apart from Amanda Nunes. And there's been a couple of fighters that have gone in there with the type of tactics that Amanda Nunes used. Sinead Kavanagh did the same, and she had moments in that fight, but she's not a fighter that's on the same level as Amanda Nunes, let's be honest. So Sinead did it and then paid the price because Cyborg was able to find her chin and put her down. Amanda Nunes was a different story, but Amanda Nunes, what she did to Cyborg, you have to bear in mind, there's no fighter out there, or probably in the history of women's mixed martial arts, that's been better than Amanda Nunes, particularly the Amanda Nunes we saw in the octagon that night when she fought Chris Cyborg. So it's, yeah, for me, Cyborg, she always will be one of the greatest to ever do it. I think she sits for me just behind Amanda Nunes there and above Ronda Rousey. But coming into this one, what is she coming into now? Her 30th professional mixed martial arts fight. She's been sort of dipping in and out over the last couple of years, fighting in the cage with less frequency, experimenting in boxing. She's been around while Larissa Pacheco has been active, and she's been in there and tested. And she had a couple of very tough challenges against Kayla Harrison. Now, Kayla Harrison wouldn't have challenged her as much in the stand-up realm, which is where Larissa Pacheco does her best work. So it's Chris Cyborg brings a different skill set to the table than a Kayla Harrison does. So we've not seen Larissa Pacheco beat a striker of Chris Cyborg's caliber. But again, the question is just, is Cyborg as good as she always was right now? Or, has Father Time caught up with Chris Cyborg? We're going to find out Saturday night. I would be putting money on Cyborg if I was a gambling man. I'm not, but if I was, it'd all be going on Chris Cyborg. I'd be betting the house on her. But there are just those questions that make us then, I suppose, want to tune into the fight. And it maybe doesn't level the playing field, but it maybe teases the prospect that the playing field may be a little bit more level than we first expected. Next up on the card, we've got Johnny Eblen and Fabian Edwards. So both of these guys fought before, and I'm just going to double check on the records here. I think they've both had one fight since that last one, which was here in Dublin, actually. And Johnny Eblen came out on that one. Yeah, he got the split decision victory over Impe Kasanganay in February this year at the PFL v Bellator card. And, this is his first fight back since. These guys were supposed to fight on the Bellator London card, which happened last month. And I was actually at that, and I didn't get to see this fight, obviously, because this one was moved to the Riyadh card, which is something that maybe pissed off some of the fans that were paying good money to go to the Bellator show in London on the basis that it was, that there was a world title fight going to be on there, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. So the Champion Series didn't have a championship fight. Nevertheless, they're having the fight now. And of course, Fabian Edwards has had one fight back since that last fight. The fight that Eblen and Edwards had was over a year ago. It was in September of 2023. So we are about 14 months or 13 months just past that now. And Fabian Edwards has had one fight as well. He fought in March, just a month after Johnny Eblen had his fight with Kasanganay. So Fabian Edwards came out the right side of a decision against Aaron Jeffrey. That was not a fight where you would have taken a lot of concussive damage. It was very, very wrestling heavy, but he managed to pass that test. And he's going to have to pass that exact test again against a better quality of fighter. I think Johnny Eblen is an outstanding wrestler, as is Aaron Jeffrey, but Johnny Eblen is a couple of levels above Aaron Jeffrey. So we saw Johnny Eblen come out of the original fight with a third round stoppage victory. For Fabian Edwards, he's basically going to have to show some big adjustments, some big improvements in his game, particularly that defensive wrestling, and not allow Eblen to dominate the fight. Eblen just still unbeaten, so nobody has been able to answer, the questions that he's been asking so far. So will we see it? I'm not very confident. I don't think we're going to see a different outcome than we did to the first fight. Maybe this time we'll go the distance on it, but I'm fairly sure that Johnny Eblen gets this one done. But either way, it's an intriguing fight, but maybe not as much intrigue as there is for the main and the co-main for me anyway. Two more fights on the main card. Paul Hughes and AJ McKee, of course, are opening the main card, and I'm going to come to that one in a moment. But there's one just sitting here in between them, and this one really piqued my interest because I kind of know one of these fighters, okay? So Hussein Kadimagamayev, okay, try saying that very fast 3 times. He's making his PFL debut, and it's a featherweight fight. So he was fighting quite a lot at lightweight over the last couple of years. He's making his debut in the promotion, okay, at featherweight against Zafar Mohsen. Now I think Zafar, let me double check, might also be making his debut too. I did do a little delving into this guy. He's making his promotional debut too. He was originally actually scheduled to fight Harry Hardwick earlier this year, and that fight, I think he fell out of that one injured, didn't he? And it was the one where Orlando Prinz stepped in to fight Harry Hardwick for the Cage Warriors featherweight title. So both guys are being drafted in, but they're being placed in this prime slot on the main card, okay? So you might think that's a bit odd for two new guys. Maybe if one of them was a high profile signing that drew a lot of fanfare along the lines of, the way Paul Hughes did, when Paul Hughes signed with Bellator, PFL last year, or it was earlier this year, wasn't it? And it was a lot of fanfare, a lot of talk about it. We were all talking about it. All the media types are talking about it. Everyone it was huge news, big news, Paul Hughes. But this guy, Hussein Kadimagamayev, it's just, here you are, you're on the card, and there's, everyone's kind of looking at it going, who are these two guys and what's going on? So Hussein Kadimagamayev fought in Brave for quite a long time. I was due to commentate on a fight he was having I think it was about a year ago now. Maybe it might even be a year ago this week. I was commentating on a Brave card in Tenerife, and he was due to fight on the card, and so I ended up doing a lot of research on him, watching all of his fights and that kind of thing. And then his fight got pulled. I think somebody, it might have been his opponent, got injured the week before, so ended up not coming through. But he had 5 or 6 fights, I think, on Brave, or he fought most of his kind of pro fights on Brave. A lot of time as a lightweight or in catchweight fights. He's an interesting fighter, but here's what's happening. Here's his backstory. He's Chechnyan, okay? Now he moved to Switzerland, I believe, when he was very young, and he's been sort of living and based out of there and training at the UFD gym in Germany. But a Chechnyan fighter on the main card on a Saudi-backed PFL event. Yeah. So where did we just see Chechen warlord Kadyrov? We just saw him, didn't we, at the in the boxing ring at a Riyadh season-backed event just very recently. So you can kind of see where the link is there. This guy is clearly on this card for, he's probably been planted on the card. This, yeah, sure, this card goes ahead, but we're going to do our friend a favor here. And this kind of stuff, it leaves a bad taste, doesn't it? We've seen Kadyrov, of course, heavily involved in martial arts. He seems to have Hamzat Chimaev under his thumb, and yeah, the whole thing just we see fighters going over there doing favors and doing public appearances, and training people over there for Kadyrov and just being at events and stuff with him. It's yeah, that's why this fight, basically, long story short, that's why this fight is sitting on the main card of the biggest event in PFL history. So yeah, not something that we really that really sits too well with me. Talk about the fighter here, Hussein Kadamagamayev. He's in there with a guy who's okay, but has never really fought at a decently high level. So he's in there with a guy here that he's expected to beat, and that's clearly the plan here. Hussein Kadamagamayev is 11-1. So what's his name? His nickname is like something Boars, so similar to. So no, it's not on his Tapology anymore, but it was something Boars. It might have changed now. That's why it's not on his Tapology. It was last year when I was piecing together my notes on this guy. But he is a dangerous fighter, and as you'd expect, he has a solid history of wrestling. He's just 25 years old, very solid grappler. He came into MMA primarily as someone with really good wrestling. He's very good at shooting takedowns out in the open, so in the center of the cage, which you see a lot of guys that are brilliant at driving their opponent back against the fence, and he can do that, and he can work takedowns from there. But he's really good at timing the level change and the entry just off the opponent throwing punches out in the center of the cage. He's lightning fast, so watch out for those very quick single leg, double leg entries. And he does look like an excellent fighter. I don't think I looked at him and watched a lot of his fights and thought, my God, this guy is crazy good, in the way that we looked at a young Hamzat Chimaev. But, he's a very good, accomplished fighter. And like I said, he's in there for political reasons. One thing I did notice, the one fight he lost, it was to a Korean guy, I believe, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he looked susceptible in that one, because he hasn't gone the distance a hell of a lot in a lot of his fights, and he looked like his gas tank was maybe wilting a little bit, and the guy who beat him was throwing up a hell of a lot of submission attempts and really causing problems for him. So, he doesn't look like a complete fighter. He looks like a very good, promising fighter, but not a complete one. So, expect him to win that fight. But as I said, the whole thing just leaves a bit of a sour taste. Opening the main card, this is the fight. This is the one that has me pumped, and this is the one that has me excited. My good friend, big news, Paul Hughes, and he's stepping in there against AJ McKee. The biggest step up in levels he probably could have got when he signed with the PFL. This is a phenomenal opportunity for Paul Hughes. It's like, I don't want to say it's like a free swing, because of course he has something to lose. Some of the shine will be taken off his signing, and the view of him as one of the best prospects in the world if he goes in there and gets beaten comfortably by someone like AJ McKee. But if he pulls this off, and if he gets his hand raised, which I believe he absolutely has a chance of doing, he's off to the races. The sky is the limit at that point, because if you beat AJ McKee, that means you're good enough to beat anybody in the world, anybody in that promotion for sure, and possibly even the world. Like he's in there with a guy who has looked sensational throughout his entire career. I think he's fought his entire career in Bellator, if I'm not mistaken. He came in, made his pro debut with the promotion, and I know his last fight against Clay Collard Jr. earlier this year was on the PFL v Bellator thing. So technically, I think it was a PFL fight, but the rest were all Bellator fights. 22-1, absolutely sensational fighter. When we look at the two fighters, we've seen Paul Hughes, we've seen him in there with some really, really good fighters, but this is the next level above. And Paul, if you've been watching any of the media that's going around this week, he was on the L Triangle. No, he wasn't on the L Triangle technically. He did an interview with Andy Stevenson that was released just before the L Triangle this week. Sean Sheehan did an interview with him as well for Sherdog, and I did an interview with him at Bellator London last month, and always just a lovely guy to talk to. He just speaks so clearly and so confidently, and I have been, he's what he's been saying is that he believes he's going to get this done within 2 rounds. He has absolute confidence that he is going to get the job done here against AJ McKee. Now, a lot of people watching from the outside might look at this and think, that's a lot of bluster. This guy is just, he's putting on that confidence and blah blah blah. He likes to smack talk. I can tell you now, from having been in and around Paul Hughes over the course of his last 3 fights, what he's actually like on fight week, on fight day. So his last fight at Bellator, I worked at the event. I was there for the media day, and I worked media. I was covering the event, so I was floating around and around backstage, and I was watching him during his walkout. His 2 fights before that in Cage Warriors, I was working for Cage Warriors, so I was dealing with Paul, and I know his team very very well. I work for Liam Shannon, his coach, on their promotion, Cage Conflict, so I know the guys really well. We're all good friends. And I've worked with Paul on that show as well. He's done a bit of commentary on it while I've been emceeing on it and stuff. So, we know each other very well. And I got to sort of just see them working, fight week in the Cage Warriors fighter hotel. The last couple of fights that were held here in Dublin, I basically would manage the backstage room that the Irish fighters are warming up in. So I'm in and around. I'm basically managing those guys and making sure that Paul gets out for his walkout on time. And I got to walk out with him as well, which was just a surreal experience. I got to literally stand right next to the guy as he's standing there and soaking in the atmosphere as the crowd are singing that song, Grace, his favorite song, along with him. And then, he does the walkout. I just get to just go along for the ride and just walk shoulder to shoulder with the guy. So those are great experiences. But what it showed me was, it showed me that his confidence is real. I remember just being struck, even just on those fights. He was coming in against Jan Cohagens last year. I think it was in and around last year in Dublin, and his first one back in a little while. And he was, everyone was saying Janko Hagens is on a run here and he's been knocking people out, and this is one of the most dangerous guys, and Paul is stepping up a weight class, and is he risking too much here, because he was waiting for the UFC call that just wasn't coming for whatever reason. And I just remember seeing him those couple of days around the hotel, and he is just so calm, chill, placid, and he's not arrogant, not braggadocious. He's just like, everything's relaxed, and it becomes time then for me to go and get him. Right, we got to go make our walk, and he's going, no, let's just relax. We'll go now in a few moments. He's watching the build up, the video intros on the big screen in the warm up area, and now we'll walk. And even when he arrives to the venue on the day of the show, he would grab me and he'd say, come on, take me for a stroll here, show me the route that we're going to walk from the dressing room to the entrance to the arena to the cage. We'll do it. And I would just stand there and watch him doing it, and he's just doing it and visualizing what's going to be happening later that night when he's walking out there for the main event. He soaks in everything, he takes in everything. And we saw this in his performances, he stays so calm and he times his shots, his punches so beautifully. And he knocked Quay Hagens out with that check left hook, which is a superb weapon. Which I think this could be a weapon that plays a part in this fight. He of course had that fight with the Brazilian gentleman whose name I can't remember earlier this year, and he got off and he got plenty of shots off on this guy. He was able to tee off on this guy and put him away. And that guy had, I think, close to 50 professional fights and had never been stopped, I think, or was he stopped once before? I think maybe never in like 47, 48 professional fights, something like that. So it was a fascinating it was fascinating just watching the variety of weapons that Paul has. And of course, when he fought Bobby King in that Bellator fight, that Bellator debut a few months back, what was interesting to me was he was able to make adjustments in real time and realize in that opening round, okay, I've done this wrong and I've done that wrong. Now I'm going to change things up and I'm just going to take this guy out of there and put him away. And Bobby King, of course, no world champion, but he was a guy that just doesn't get put away when he fights people. He hadn't been put away in a hell of a long, long time. And Paul Hughes was able to just decide, okay, I'm going to change things up here and I'm just going to take this guy out of here. And he took him down to the mat and smashed him up and put him away. So it's things like that give me confidence that Paul Hughes can get this job done. If you look at the accomplishments, the career trajectory of both fighters on paper, you're going to look at it in the cold hard light of day and say, right, AJ McKee would probably be the favourite going into this. But stylistically, when you watch the two, Paul Hughes has a much tidier, more precise range of striking, more efficient, I think is the word I'm looking for. AJ McKee likes to fight at that long range. Of course, he's in that opposite stance, that southpaw stance, and he likes to play those long range weapons. He wants to get you frustrated, get you pushing forward onto him, and then he wants to time those takedowns. If AJ McKee is to win this fight, it will probably be by submission. He's one of the best submission grapplers in mixed martial arts today. He is unbelievably dangerous. We haven't seen Paul on the mat with somebody with those type of weapons, so we can't estimate how he will get on the mat with AJ McKee because we don't have anything to base it off. What we can estimate is how the striking will play out. Paul does his best work with those short shots on the inside. And what he's brilliant at is catching guys coming in. The check left hook I just mentioned against Jan Krajhagens or Krajhagens, I can't remember which way I have to pronounce that. Things like the Canelo-esque left hook to the body. Paul fights with a slightly more squared up stance, similar to what Alex Pereira does. He's not as bladed as a lot of fighters. He opens up his body that little bit more, and what that does is it allows him to get lots of torque into those, particularly those left hooks to the body, to the head. He's quite powerful. He's a stout, strong built fella, and what's really impressive to me is just the timing. He doesn't miss with a hell of a lot of those shots. He's very good at catching you at the very, very moment you're stepping in. We contrast that with AJ McKee. McKee throws a lot of long, like I mentioned, shots, a lot of wild and unorthodox ones. He leaves himself open and vulnerable, particularly when he throws kicks. That's very evident to me when I watch his fights. He throws kicks awkwardly. They don't look silky, smooth, technical. They look a little wild, and his hands come down and his chin comes up and he throws his legs in a sort of an awkward manner, which can be a problem for fighters that are fighting against him. But if you're in there with a fighter who's getting a good read on things and has a good understanding of range, it can be a risky game to play. And I think Paul fits that narrative. A really good fight to watch back if you're looking to understand the contrast in styles that I'm speaking about right now is the one fight that AJ McKee lost, which was the second fight against Patricio Pitbull. So Patricio Pitbull fights in probably the same way that I expect Paul Hughes to fight this weekend. He's not going to do what he did to Bobby King and just charge forward and just go in recklessly on this guy. He may start to try get him fighting on the back foot, but he's going to do it patiently. I think he's going to come out and try and take the center of the cage and get AJ McKee reacting to what he's doing. But like I said, I don't think he's going to bull rush him. But then it's a case of just not overthrowing your shots and just, not getting caught. You don't want to be getting caught, throwing two, three, four shots and overthrowing them, and then McKee ducks underneath and takes you to the mat. You're in a world of trouble then. So I think everything is going to be measured, and Patricio Pitbull did a brilliant job of that. What really worked well for him in that fight was the outside calf kick. So I think orthodox fighter fighting against a southpaw, he was able to do that a lot to chip away at AJ McKee's legs. And a couple of them don't look like they're causing a lot of damage, but then those add up. And what they do is not only do they limit your opponent's movement and his ability to kind of move around the cage, things like that, what they also do is they limit his ability to set down on his feet, to distribute his weight, and to move his head to slip shots. If you're even a millisecond off when you're trying to slip a heavy shot, a big right hand, a strong left hook, that can cost you. That can be lights out, particularly against someone who hits as hard as Paul Hughes. So I think that's where the fight could be won and lost. It's going to be a case of if Paul Hughes can be patient enough, be safe enough, and then in the right moments land the impactful strikes that are going to sway the fight in his direction. It could well go all 3 rounds. Like I said, I think if AJ McKee is to win, it will more than likely be via submission. But I think if Paul is to win, it will be a decision because he's landed the more impactful strikes over at least 2 of those rounds. I can absolutely see Paul Hughes cracking him and finishing him, but AJ McKee has never been cracked and finished. So the odds on that happening are, probably slim enough. But either way, it's a fight I'm so excited to watch. Of course, knowing Paul well, it's going to be difficult not to be biased. I'm trying to call this one down the middle. I think just that the stylistic matchup, if he fights the right fight, he has the opportunity to win this one. It could all go wrong. Who knows? But if he wins this one, you can just buy this man a ticket to the moon. He's taking over the world. On the undercard, then, I mean, the undercard of this fight, it's not very star-studded. I think a lot of people were hoping that they were going to see like a Brendan Loughnane and guys like that, some of the bigger names of the PFL and Bellator rosters on this. And there's not too many here. There's a lot of people that we maybe don't know. We do have Rafian Stotts on there, who's 20-2, and he's been around a hell of a long time. Rafian Stotts been making waves over the last couple of years in Bellator in particular. And Ibragimov is 7-0, and he's the guy whose brother plays for Man United underage, isn't he? And he's looked sensational. Who was his last fight against? Remember, he's been absolutely blown away by it. I think was it PFL Scotland earlier this year. The Josh Reed fight, yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. And the first round submission, that was sensational. So he has looked every part one of the best prospects in the company. So those are probably the guys to look out for on the undercard. I mean, outside of that, there's not a whole lot that's really jumping off the page at me, but that main card, and like I said, particularly my main focus here is the opener of the main card. I think that's the one that's exciting me the most. Outside of that, we have the UFC card, and oh my goodness, it's just, yeah, I'm gonna just reel off a couple of the fights on here. It's one of those that, with the fights happening in Saudi Arabia that night, this one just there's not a whole lot on there that's really exciting. There are some good names in there. Michel Pereira and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez are in the main event. Two decent guys who are on decent winning runs in the middleweight division. Michel Pereira, after the fight, I think it was against Santiago Ponzinibbio, he moved up to middleweight and he's gone 3-0, and I think he's finished all 3 of those in the first round. So everyone looks at that and is like, whoa, he's on a win streak. But then, like, you look at the guys he's beaten, I need to click on his record here. Is it Potieria and Oleksiejczuk, guys who are pretty much losing every time, or more or less every time they step foot in the octagon. Yeah, Andrei Petroski, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, and Oleksiejczuk, sorry, and Igor Potieria. So, 3 guys that are, pretty much on losing streaks. So it's difficult to know how much value you would place in that. I mean, is he winning against those guys because he's so good at middleweight and it suits him better, or is he just winning because they're just such winnable fights? Anthony Hernandez as well, Fluffy Hernandez, he's on a bit of a winning streak too. He's 12-2 overall, but he's is it a 5-fight win streak? 1, 2, 3, yeah, 5-fight win streak. Adolfo Vieira is in there, Marc Andre Barrios, Edmund Shabazian. So some guys in there, Roman Kopylov, guys in there of a better quality. So, he's been fighting the better quality Fluffy Hernandez. But like I said, we don't know if Michel Pereira is on that win streak because he's having easy fights or because he's actually really good at this weight class. So I suppose we're going to find out, aren't we, on Saturday night? That's an interesting headliner. I think they're ranked 12 and 13 in middleweight as well. So this fight ain't going to do a hell of a lot to the rankings. It's not going to kick anyone up into the stratosphere of the title discussion. Rob Font fights Kyler Phillips in the co-main event. That's a decent fight, a good bantamweight fight there. Two guys of a decent level. Rob Font has been around for quite a few years, never really troubled the title picture, but he's been in some big fights, and Kyler Phillips has looked impressive in his UFC career so far. So it's a decent one. Slightly further down the card, we have Jake Hadley is back, and he's at bantamweight again, which is the weight class that he beat our boy at the last time. So he's up from flyweight, and I think given that he struggled maybe with the weight a few times, I think he just looked better, didn't he? The last time, he just looked so much stronger over the 3 rounds. I'm hoping he's made that permanent move now to 135. He's in there against Cameron Smotherman, who I actually don't know and haven't heard of. So let's have a quick nosy at this guy and see where he is. He's 0-1 on the Contender Series, and this is his UFC debut. Okay, you're up against it, son. Yeah, it's not fantastic. He lost on the Contender Series and then went back and had a few more fights on Fury FC. He lost in 1 minute on the Contender Series and then went back and won 3 fights on Fury FC. So yeah, he's maybe jumping up a little bit too far up the levels here. I don't think people realize how good Jake Hadley is. Further down the card, then Brad Katona is in there with the unbeaten Jean Matsumoto. So a big test for Brad. That's on the undercard also at bantamweight, and Brad's in his second stint now with the UFC. Of course, he's won the Ultimate Fighter twice, so he's got a second chance at it here, but you got to make it work second time around. If you start dropping results second time round after being bumped out of the UFC beforehand, it's not a good look. So, he's had a good start to his UFC. What is he now since the Ultimate Fighter? 2-1 since he came back in. He lost that decision to Garrett Armfield, but he's got 2 wins, a win either side of that defeat. So, yeah, Brad's doing okay. But yeah, if he could extend that run to 3-1, be so much better for him. Last 2 fights we're talking about then: Brave Tenerife, Richie Smullen, and we've got he's fighting. It's a one-off, I think, on the the Brave card. Sorry, I'm trying to type, just find the card here because I didn't pull it up. But he's fighting. He's been fighting primarily on Cage Legacy, and there were fights that I called this year. He's been tearing it up, really. He's pulled off 3 first-round victories against Marcondes Bastos, Kieran Medvedovsky, and Marcos Jr. So 3 fights in Cage Legacy. One of those being, of course, in Liverpool, and those are all since it was the middle of last year when he left Bellator after that fight with Timur Khizriev. So he'd been in there with some really good fights at Bellator. I've spoken to Richie a few times, and he said that his target was to make one more run at getting to the UFC. Of course, he was in the Ultimate Fighter before. I don't think he actually fought in the promotion properly, but he was trying to rack up a few wins, and he was kind of maybe eyeing up something like a Dana White Contender Series or a road to the UFC, and of course hasn't really broken in, hasn't had that opportunity yet. And of course the Contender Series just wrapping up, so maybe the window might have just passed by for this year. But he'll be in there against it's Jose Sanchez that he's fighting here at Brave 89 Tenerife. This is the show that I commentated on a year ago. It's a nice venue, and he's in there. Is he the co-main event? He is. So that's a really good co-main event. Actually, Luis Cado is the main event. Luis is a Brazilian fighter. I commentated on his last fight as well for Brave. He's an exceptional fighter. Dan Dice as well, a former Cage Warriors bantamweight on the card. This card is not bad at all. Dutch fighter as well. Ilyas Boulaid is quite a handful. And Anwar Ben Saeed, he finished his fight with leg kicks on this show last year, so he's pretty good. And Jared Burns further down the card, and he's in there against a guy who's 4-3, so he's in there in a bantamweight matchup this time, but in a matchup that he's probably going to be expected to win. Jared Burns really making a name for himself in the Brave flyweight division, so those are the guys to look out for this weekend. Of course, we've got the PFL card, the UFC card has a couple of decent fights on there, and then these two guys, which is going to be on. This one is, I'm going to hazard a guess that this is being a European show. It's probably going to be on at a similar time as the PFL cards, or maybe even the undercard if we're lucky. So, might be able to sort of double screen it and watch the Irish guys fighting before moving over to catch Paul Hughes. I'm unfortunately not going to see any of the action this weekend because I am commentating on Deliverance Muay Thai in Belfast. So I will be live commentating and ring announcing at the same time, two jobs. So I'm not going to get any. My ring light is going a bit crazy here. I'm not going to get any viewing done of the PFL card, but I hope you guys enjoy the fights. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I will see you next week.